Think about someone who showed up for you, not in a small way, in the way that actually matters, during one of the harder stretches of your life. Someone who made the weight of that time a little easier to carry. Hold that person in mind for a moment. Now ask yourself, where are they today? If the answer came with a quiet feeling you weren't expecting, this might be worth a listen. Because today, we're talking about the people who share your umbrella in the storm, and what sometimes happens when the sun finally comes out. It started the way most meaningful things do, without announcement. You weren't looking for a friendship that deep. You rarely are when you find one dot. It just appeared in the middle of an ordinary moment. Maybe it was a conversation that went 3 hours longer than it had any reason to. Maybe it was the way they said exactly the right thing, without knowing how much you needed to hear it. Or maybe it was simply the way they looked at you. Like they actually saw you, not the version of yourself you perform for everyone else. And something in you relaxed. For the first time in a while, you felt genuinely known. Not in the polite way. Not the surface level, how are you? That doesn't really want an honest answer. This was different. This was someone willing to sit with you in the storm without needing it to make sense. You didn't have to explain yourself. You didn't have to be okay. And after a long stretch of performing, that felt like a kind of relief. So, you opened the umbrella, and you said, "Here, let's share this." And then you gave. The way genuinely caring people do, without keeping score. You gave your time. Not the spare time at the edges of your schedule. Your actual time. Evenings you could have rested. Mornings spent on the phone instead. Plans that got canceled because they needed someone, and you were that someone. You gave your energy. Even when your own reserves were low, you found something to offer. You carried their worry alongside your own. You gave your loyalty. In rooms they weren't in, when their name came up, you were the one who spoke well of them. Not because anyone asked, because that's what you do for people you care about. And you gave your vulnerability. That was the one that cost the most. You let them into the parts of yourself you rarely show anyone. The things you don't say out loud unless you trust someone to handle them carefully. For a long time, they did. Two people, one umbrella, facing the storm together. You didn't mind getting a little wet at the edges. That felt like what love looks like when it's real. Looking back, you can see the signs. You may not have been able to see them then. Or maybe you could, and you chose not to. That's the complicated truth about noticing things you don't want to be true. You file them under. Probably nothing. I'm reading too much into it. The first sign was small. A reply that took a little longer than usual. A conversation that felt slightly shorter. A moment where you said something that mattered, and the response felt thin. Like they were physically present, but somewhere else entirely. You told yourself they were busy. Life gets busy. The second sign was harder to explain away. Plans that used to form easily started requiring more effort. Invitations that used to be accepted right away started becoming maybes, which quietly became no's. You reached out more than they did. You initiated more. You noticed it, even if you didn't say it out loud. But you told yourself that friendships go through phases. That people get caught up. That this was just a rough patch. So you held the umbrella a little tighter. And you waited. Then your season changed. Not all at once. Life rarely works that cleanly. But gradually, and then unmistakably, the storm in your life began to pass. Things that had been broken started healing. The heavy weight that had defined so much of that period began, slowly, to lift. You should have felt only relief. But there's a strange thing that sometimes happens when things get better. It's only when the noise quiets that you can finally hear what's been missing. And what you heard in the quiet was their absence. You noticed it first in small moments. Something good happening, and your first instinct being to call them, followed by a pause, a hesitation before dialing, an awareness that you weren't sure how the call would land anymore. When you did see them, something felt different. The ease that used to be there felt effortful. Conversations that once flowed had gaps in them. You watched them laugh easily with other people, and you remembered when that laugh used to be directed at you. The sun was coming out, and they were already walking toward it without looking back. And then one day, the truth arrived, not dramatically, not through a fight or a final conversation that gave you closure, just quietly, in an ordinary moment when your guard was down. Maybe it was seeing them somewhere you hadn't been invited. Maybe it was a message left unread for days that would have been answered within minutes, not long ago. Or maybe it was just a moment of sitting still and doing the maths, counting how long it had been since they reached out first. Not an obligatory check-in, not a reaction to something you'd posted. An actual, I was thinking about you. How are you, really? The maths didn't lie. And you stood there, umbrella still in hand, rain long gone, and let yourself see what had been true for a while. They had moved on. Not cruelly, maybe not even consciously, but the friendship that had felt like something permanent, something load-bearing, had quietly become optional to them. And the hardest part wasn't the distance itself. It was knowing that you would never have let it go the other way around. If their storm had passed first, you would have been the first one running toward them in the sunshine. You would have shown up. That part takes the longest to make peace with. Not that they left, but that you wouldn't have. Here's what I want to leave you with. Not as a comfort that dismisses what you lost, but as something that honestly honors it. What you experienced was real. The connection was real. The warmth of sharing that umbrella during the worst of the storm, that was as real as anything gets. The fact that it didn't last forever doesn't erase what it was while it existed. But here is the part nobody really prepares you for. Some people come into your life as shelter, not as permanent residents. They arrive exactly when you need them. They give you exactly what that season required. They hold you through the storm with a care that feels specific to you. And then the storm passes. And their role, the one they may not have even been conscious of, quietly completes itself. This doesn't make them villains. It makes them human. People love at the capacity they're capable of. They show up at the level their own history allows. Not everyone who couldn't stay was choosing to leave. Some people genuinely don't know how to exist in the sunshine with the same people they sheltered with in the rain. That's their limitation, not your failing. So if you're carrying this, if there's someone whose absence still sits quietly somewhere in your chest, give yourself permission to grieve it honestly. Not dramatically, not bitterly, but honestly. Let yourself acknowledge that it mattered, that losing it hurt, that you deserved more than a friendship with an expiry date you weren't told about. And then gently begin to make room. Because the way you loved them, that generosity, that loyalty, that willingness to get a little wet so someone else stayed dry, that is not a weakness. That is exactly the kind of person worth knowing. And somewhere ahead, there is someone who will stand in the rain with you, not just take shelter under your umbrella, but bring their own and share it back.